After losing my mother, I felt like I was alone in the world. However, an unexpected event occurred when a stranger saw the ring I was wearing. My mother's memorial ring, which I wore to a job interview, turned out to have a deeper meaning. The interviewer also wore a similar ring, not expecting that this encounter would lead to an extraordinary discovery that would change his life forever. Hello everyone, welcome to Stories to Heal. Today I am happy to share a new story with you. Don't forget to subscribe and watch to the end. Amelia sat in the living room, her eyes fixed on a photo of her smiling mother on the end table. It was a day of mixed emotions. The loss of her mother had changed everything. The world that had been full of peace now felt empty. Even though her father was always there to support her, Amelia still felt lonely. That morning, she woke up early, wearing a navy blue suit that her mother had made for her. The simple suit was not just clothing, but a symbol of her mother's love and affection, full of childhood memories that gave Amelia inner strength. Amelia knew very well that this opportunity could not be wasted. The interview she was about to go to was the first step towards a better future. She applied for a job as an office assistant at a fairly large construction company in the city. The job might not sound glamorous, but it was the kind of job that gave her a much-needed sense of stability, especially after her mother's death. There were no guarantees from the outside world anymore, and Amelia knew that the only one she could rely on was herself. Before she left, Amelia looked at the ring on her finger. It was her mother's ring that she had worn for a long time. The ring had become a kind of reminder that gave her strength when she felt tired or lost. Inside the ring were engraved words that always calmed her down. Where there's hope. The words were like a mantra, reminding her that even though life was full of challenges, there was always hope. Amelia squeezed the ring for a moment, as if trying to find comfort. Then she picked up her bag and walked out of the house. As she closed the door, she looked at the photo of her mother that was still on the table. A warm feeling filled her heart, but also a deep sadness. She was determined to use her mother as an inspiration to prove that she could be successful and live a courageous life. In the waiting room of the company, the atmosphere was very formal. There were many other candidates, all with confident facial expressions and neat portfolios. Amelia felt very small in the midst of them. Although she had prepared well, feelings of anxiety and lack of confidence began to overcome her. The other candidates seemed more experienced, more knowledgeable about the industry, more familiar with the technical terms often used in the construction world. Amelia felt very different and out of place. She tried to calm herself, but her nervousness grew. As the atmosphere in the waiting room became more tense, Amelia felt like she was in a room full of pressure. The other candidates were just talking to each other in a technical language that was foreign to her. Amelia could only remain silent, trying to listen and find a way to fit into their conversation. However, none of the conversations could make her feel any calmer. Finally, her name was called to enter the interview room. Amelia stood up with a pounding heart, trying to calm her increasingly rapid heartbeat. She entered the cramped room where Mr. Reynolds, the interviewer, sat behind a desk filled with blueprints and documents. The room was very simple, with walls covered in faded paint and an old wooden chair in the corner. Above the chair hung a worn hard hat, indicating the simplicity of the construction world in which Mr. Reynolds worked. When Mr. Reynolds reached out to shake her hand, Amelia felt uncomfortable. Mr. Reynolds' hands were rough, covered with scars and wrinkles that showed the hard life he had lived. But Amelia tried to remain calm, even though a strange feeling was rising inside her. They talked about work, and although Amelia could not talk much about technical matters, she spoke sincerely about her desire to learn, to start from the bottom, and about the hard work her mother had always taught her. The interview went smoothly. Mr. Reynolds, who was known to be a very strict and unsentimental person, began to open up. Amelia felt like she was getting a chance to show who she was, and she felt more comfortable talking about her previous job and her positive attitude. But suddenly, while they were talking, Mr. Reynolds stopped for a moment and focused his gaze on Amelia's hand. That ring? Mr. Reynolds said slowly, his voice a little shaky. Amelia was surprised. She followed Mr. Reynolds' gaze and couldn't help but feel a little anxious. "It looks familiar," he continued, his voice lower than before. Amelia was confused, but she replied, "This is my mother's ring. She always wore it," she said quietly, unsure of what to say next. Mr. Reynolds looked more closely at the ring and then asked, "May I take a closer look?" Amelia was a little surprised, but she took the ring off and handed it to Mr. Reynolds. As Mr. Reynolds held the ring, he was silent for a long time, as if thinking about something. Slowly, he took another ring from his pocket, a ring that was almost identical. "There's an engraving inside," Mr. Reynolds said, holding up the ring. Amelia stared at it in amazement. It was engraved exactly like the one she was wearing. Where there's hope, Amelia's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Reynolds held the two rings in his hands, and for a moment, time stood still. "My father made these rings," Mr. Reynolds said, his voice suddenly full of emotion. "One for me, one for my sister." "Your sisters?" Amelia asked, almost in a whisper. Her voice was barely audible from shock. Mr. Reynolds nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "My sister is your mother," he said quietly. Amelia felt the world spin around her. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. All the questions she had about who she was and where her family came from seemed to be answered in an instant. This wasn't just another job interview. It was a revelation that would change her life forever. Mr. Reynolds began to talk about his sister, Amelia's mother, the woman he had loved so much and lost so long ago. "We were separated by tragic circumstances. We were separated when we were young, and though I searched for my sister for years, I never found her," he said, his voice heavy. Amelia listened intently, her heart pounding. He told her about her mother, how she was a loving, hard-working woman who always did her best. As they shared stories of their past, Amelia felt closer to the man she had just met, who turned out to be her uncle. The years lost, the relationships broken, now reconnected by a small ring that had been a simple reminder of hope. But now it was a symbol of a family reunited, albeit belatedly. That day, the interview became irrelevant. What mattered was that Amelia, a young girl who had felt isolated, had finally found the family she had been searching for without even realizing it. The ring brought new hope, not only for the job she wanted, but for a family she had never known existed. They spent the rest of the day talking. Mr. Reynolds showed pictures of his family, told stories about his wife and two sons. Amelia listened intently, feeling more connected to a world that had previously felt lonely. "They're going to like you," Mr. Reynolds said, a phrase that made Amelia feel, for the first time, that she wasn't alone. In the weeks that followed, Amelia began to work at the company. But more importantly, she began to develop a deeper relationship with Mr. Reynolds, whom she now called Uncle. This relationship wasn't just about work. It was about a rediscovered family and how a small ring could connect two souls separated by time. Through this story, Amelia learned that while life often brings us sadness and loss, sometimes hope comes from unexpected places. Her mother's ring, once a symbol of remembrance, became a reminder that even when we feel disconnected from the world, there is always light waiting to be found, a place where hope can always be found. Enjoyed this story? Like and subscribe for more, and share your thoughts with a single word in the comments.